Hi, this is Paul Ballard for Wintellect Dev Center. I'm here today with Naomi Moneypenny. She is Chief Technology Officer at ManyWorlds, an astrophysicist and machine learning expert, and also a Microsoft Office MVP. Welcome, Naomi.
Hi, Paul. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. So we're going to ask you 5 questions today. For question number 1, in your Twitter site, you mention humanizing technology. What do you mean by humanizing technology?
I really think about it as being a different way to communicate with people. And so I think a lot of times we've done technology for technology's sake and really not really thought about what we can do to actually think about the human side of it. So the aspect in terms of what kind of user experiences are useful for us, how can we take technology and make it into our everyday experiences, and really sort of make the technology look seamless with how we interact with things. So when I talk about humanizing, there's a culture between, oh, maybe there's something that a robot could do better than a person, right? So we see that in Hollywood, we see it in a lot of sci-fi type of stuff, and really it's about understanding that technology is there to augment and enable what we can do and to really free up a lot of our time. So when I talk about humanizing technology, it's really about understanding what it is that we can do together with technology, how it can take us a little further, and to sort of offload some of the tasks that we don't want to do and are not very proficient as people, but really think about then what we can do that's more than that, because we've got technology to handle those kind of areas.
So what is an adaptive recombinant system?
It's an adaptive recombinant system. A system that learns and recombines. Okay. So an adaptive system is really about understanding the inputs and the things that are going on inside of the system. And so the coexistence of that system and understanding what is going on around it so that it can adapt and change itself. And so recombining what goes on is really thinking about, here are the individual elements, whether they're elements inside of an idea, inside of an algorithm, or even different inputs and different kinds of sources. So we can think about recombining that in an interesting and new way. And so the whole concept of an adaptive recombinant system is really one that is able to learn, to recombine itself depending on the kinds of things that are in its environment, and then really using some of those machine learning techniques and some other cool stuff technology-wise, we can really think about how to take that system and move it and use it in new and different ways.
Are there some publicly available examples you can cite?
Oh, sure. So there's a lot of different areas. So, it sounds kind of, well, I guess a little high level, right, to say adaptive recombinant system, but it's really thinking about what we do in terms. So if you go to synxi.com, synxi.com, you can check out what we do in terms of machine learning for SharePoint, for Yammer. It's really thinking about how we can find and discover content and expertise inside of an organization that you didn't know existed. And so really figuring out what it is that a machine can do, sort of intelligently learn around different things inside of an enterprise, as well as also just, externally. Really thinking about how it can take the kinds of knowledge and expertise that are inside of an organization and discover that and then feed it to you when you need it. So recommendations are one of those things. It's only sort of useful to you when it is that you need that recommendation. So it's kind of an interesting experience in that you want something that can learn and adapt and be around you and understand your needs and your preferences and what it is that you need inside of your enterprise. But then you can take it one step further and say, okay, this machine is learning and it's learning about me and inside of my company, inside of my enterprise, but I can even go further than that outside onto the internet too. And so, we see a lot of different areas, right? So we see things like Watson coming out of IBM. We see machine learning services being more and more available to us every single day. We see those new offerings on Azure. We also see, other areas in terms of thinking about how we can influence these inside of our consumer lives. So oftentimes people, cite things like Amazon.com's recommendations, right? It's a very simple sort of process. People who looked at this also looked at this, right? But it really helps us. And about 35% of the revenue at Amazon is actually generated off of that recommendations experience. And so it's really about, how do we have a system that learns? How do we have a system that can think about the different inputs and what it's getting and be able to provide an experience that really works for you as an individual?
So can machine learning make SharePoint something more than a document dumping ground?
Yes, that's a great question, right? So I don't know what it takes to make SharePoint more than a dumping ground, but I think that's the traditional problem of the ages, right? Everybody thinks it's an extended network drive. But really, I think the opportunity is, yes, you can take it to do a little bit more. And some of it is because, maybe a user interface hasn't been as great as an experience as we want to give our users. And so the tendency to just drop files off there, becomes that sort of, it's an easy temptation to fall into because I don't want to have to do the work around putting keywords and taxonomy and all that kind kind of stuff. So let's think about it from the other way around, right? Machines are good at learning about people, right? They're good at learning about your behaviors and your habits and analyzing vast amounts of data. So the opportunities to go a little further definitely exist. So inside of SharePoint, so instead of looking at, I want to create a taxonomy or a keyword experience that people can really navigate or try to search through, really think about how can I understand you as an individual. So machine learning can help with that. And so we've seen the advent of Office Graph and the new experience called Delve, and also our own technology at Synxi really allows people, whether they're in SharePoint 2010 on premises, SharePoint 2013 on premises, and even into other collaboration systems like Yammer. And so thinking about how we can extract meaning out of those information, but also the behavioral inferencing that's going on. So if it understands what you as a person are doing and what you're interested in, it can figure out what it is that you need in order to help you get a task accomplished faster.
So you mentioned Delve. Can you tell us a little bit about that and the Office Graph APIs?
Sure. So Delve is a new experience from Microsoft, and it's a new user experience. And so I think it's really important to understand the difference from an Office Graph versus Delve, right? So Delve is that user application, and it's the first application that's been built on top of the Office Graph. So Office Graph is really about Office 365, understanding the connections and relationships between people and the documents that they're working in. And so looking at what we can do from a people perspective, really saying, okay, this person is looking at these people in email, is having these kinds of conversations, they're looking at these kinds of content inside of Yammer, they're sharing these kinds of content inside of OneDrive for Business as well as inside of their own SharePoint. So sort of view, modification, creation, the things that you're interacting with the most, right? And so Office Graph is basically taking that relationship data, currently it's about 3 months worth of that data, and they're mining those signals to try to find the other stuff that's useful to you. So oftentimes we have that problem, like for example, maybe you've forgotten what it is that somebody shared with you in a meeting a couple of weeks ago. And you're like, oh, I remember I was in that meeting, but I just need to find that information. I just can't remember if it was in OneDrive or if it was in SharePoint. I can't remember exactly the title, but I remember the people that I was in the meeting with, right? And so oftentimes you can go to Delve as that sort of first user experience and say, oh, look at the stuff that's been shared with me or presented by me or those kinds of things. And so I can check out that view and then I can see what it is that those people have shared with me. And I have much more holistic experience because it's not about the different applications. It's not about I have to go look in OneDrive, then I have to go look in SharePoint, then I have to go check in Yammer or check my email. It's about bringing those things together for me and finding the stuff that's relevant for me. So Office Graph is very exciting in that you can build these new user experiences on top of it. And Delve is that first one, as I mentioned. But really, there's a lot more opportunity in the future to take that APIs and actually extend it into new applications. So one of the things we're going to do at Synxi is really look at how we can take that information and actually take the on-premises information that we have from being able to calculate that kind of Office Graph experience for on-premises, and then be able to use that in a hybrid environment. So if people have Exchange, for example, up in the cloud, and oftentimes they still have their SharePoint on-prem, but you really want to be able to unify that data, right? And say, okay, I want a learning layer basically across those experiences. And so that's one of the things that we're looking at how to do. So there'll be lots of opportunity for people to take that kind of Office Graph information, marry it with stuff for on-premises, and think about how they can create applications that really serve the users that they want.
And how do you see mobile and enterprise social networking change the workplace in the future? Let me start that one over again.
Sure.
How do you see mobile and enterprise social networking changing the workplace in the future?
Wow, that's a big question. Right? How has it already changed so much, right? So I think the mobile device becomes that computing device that we all deal with every day. So I think things have really changed just in our consumer lives. So let me start there. Think about what it is that we've seen in the revolution, right? Just in the last sort of decade or so. It used to be that your enterprise computing platform was, you come into the desk in the morning, the desktop machine you had in front of you was like the best that you had, right? It was the best thing you had access to. So enterprise computing was kind of that vanguard of technology, right? You'd go into the office because the communications were better, the computer was faster, the applications were newer, all that kind of stuff. And really that has had a massive shift, right? Just in the last 10 years or so. Oftentimes the stuff you have at home is oftentimes better than what you're using on your IT, right? Inside of your organization. And it's a really difficult experience for people to get their heads around, right? So we hear a lot about this idea of consumerization of IT. And it's like, okay, great. Well, this idea of I can have these services and I have these different things and they all somehow live in this cloud, right? And so, my data is being stored so I can access it from any device. But I really think it's a bit more than that. It's really about consuming the services that you want. And so the real change is happening inside of organizations in the way that we purchase IT, right, as well as understanding what it is we do with that IT. And so, before corporate systems, people would basically, they find that product that hit probably 80% of their needs, right? And so there'd always be a 20% of the people in the company that weren't quite served by it, but it was close enough. We do the deal, and then we implement the new technology, and then 3 years later, we do that whole system again, right? And so what has changed now is that people are used to going to their mobile device, right? They're used to going to a new device and saying, I just want this service, and I want it now, and I want it for 5 minutes, and then I'm never going to use it again, or maybe I only use it once a month, or those kind of areas, right? And so we're thinking about, from an enterprise perspective, how do we deliver those kinds of services? How do we deliver those kind of consumer experiences that we want, but make them enterprise grade? And so the next layer to that is understanding about enterprise social networking. We're all familiar with social networking in our own lives, right? It's really it's become an important way of communicating. And now people don't pick up the phone, right? They don't send emails anymore. Generally, they just post stuff on Facebook, right? And use some privacy controls around that. Or maybe they use, Twitter and Instagram, those kinds of things. But we've gotten used to that consumer experience whereby we are able to share this with a large amount of people at the same time. And so the conversations that we have with people have actually changed because of it, right? There's not this long catch-up that needs to be going on. You can just check somebody's Facebook and see, what's going on in their lives and how things are going. And so really thinking about what that means inside of the organization is about understanding the agility and the responsiveness inside of the company. So the ability to be able to share an idea and to be able to have it accessible by other people inside of the organization really takes it to a whole new level. Email is very presumptive in that it assumes that you know who will benefit from the recipient of that information, right? And so it's presumptive in that way because we can't share it with everybody. We would have too much noise to deal with. But enterprise social is a great way to be able to say, I can communicate this idea, whether it's an idea, whether it's something I'm looking at, something I'm working on, any of those kinds of things, but I can get to contribute my experiences and skills in a different way. And so it's not just about the role that I'm in, it's also about understanding the different parts of communicating this across the organization. So enterprise social is great from the perspective of I can consume the group feed that I'm in right now. So I can have a group in Yammer or a group in SharePoint, it doesn't matter. I can take that group and be in a project team and work on the stuff that's really important to me. But I can take it one step further and think about how do I communicate these things inside the organization? How do I break down some of the silos? How do I make hierarchies actually responsive, right? And so thinking about how information flows in a network becomes much more important. So the same kinds of stuff we're seeing from a consumer perspective where we're communicating en masse with a group of friends or a group of family, we can actually take that to the next level and say, what does this mean for inside of my organization, right? And so enterprise social networking really helps you to sort of mirror what's going on inside of your company, how your company actually works, right? Because you're seeing these relationships, you're seeing how information is flowing and networking, and you can actually mirror a lot of the culture of what's going on inside of your organization because of it. So it's kind of, from the future perspective, we've had all these massive change, we've had this change in mobile devices where it runs everything, and then we think about enterprise social networking as the next step. And then, okay, what's going next, right? It's really about, again, that agility part of the organization. How do I get the information that I need inside of my company, and how do I get it done faster? How do I get the information into the higher decision quality? How can I get the information I need to make that decision even faster, even better, and be even more responsive? So one of the guys that was a mentor for me at Shell, wrote this book a long time ago called The Living Company. Ari de Hoos was his name. And one of the great quotes that he had is really around learning to learn faster is the only sustainable source of competitive advantage. So learning to learn faster, right? That's really where we're at, right? We need even machines to help us with some of those things, to be able to crunch the amount of data because there's so much data we can't process it all as humans. But we need to go even further than that because it's about learning to learn faster. It doesn't matter if it's in your consumer life, in your career life, or just for your organization. If you can't learn faster than the competitor, then you're not going to execute faster than that competitor, and you can't be as agile and responsive as an organization. So all of that stuff really means about, okay, I can take mobile, I can take enterprise social, and I really want to be able to embed the way that we learn faster inside of our organizations. And that's what all these new technologies are really contributing to. So that's where I see that future.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us today.
All right, thank you so much, Paul. It's been a pleasure.